They don't use force. They don't need to. They make you want to stay. They make you doubt yourself. They make you think it's your fault. Tonight, we're going inside the mechanics of manipulation, how it starts, how it hooks you, and why it's so hard to escape. Get comfortable, settle in, let the noise of the day fade into the background. There's no rush, just you and the dark and something worth understanding. Tonight, 3 mechanisms. We'll start with the hook, the overwhelming flood of attention that makes you feel like you've finally found what you've been searching for. Too good to be true, and it is. Then we'll explore the trap, the unpredictable pattern of reward and punishment that creates addiction stronger than any drug. The reason people stay long after they should have left. And finally, the fog, the slow erosion of your ability to trust your own perception. The moment when you stop believing your own eyes. By the end, you'll understand how manipulation works. Not as a vague concept, as a precise system. In the early stages of a manipulative relationship, something happens that feels like magic. You are seen completely, deeply, for the first time in your life. The attention is overwhelming, constant texts, thoughtful gifts, compliments that seem to reach parts of yourself you didn't know existed. They remember everything you say, they anticipate your needs, they seem to understand you better than anyone ever has. It feels like love, the most intense love you've ever experienced. But it isn't love, it's a technique. Researchers who study cults and abusive relationships have documented this pattern extensively. They call it love bombing. The term comes from the Unification Church, the Moonies, who used overwhelming affection to recruit new members. Surround someone with attention, admiration, and apparent devotion. Make them feel special, chosen, the center of your world, and they will follow you anywhere. Love bombing works because it exploits a fundamental human need. The need to be seen and valued. Most people go through life feeling somewhat invisible, ordinary, unremarkable. When someone appears who treats you like you're extraordinary, it's intoxicating. You don't question it, you want to believe it. The speed is part of the design. Love bombers don't build relationships slowly, they rush, declarations of love within days, talk of marriage within weeks. The target is swept up before they have time to think critically, before red flags can register, before friends and family can raise concerns. There's also isolation built into the process. The love bomber wants all your attention. They're jealous of your friends. They miss you when you're gone for an hour. It seems flattering at first, someone who loves you this much, but the function is to separate you from people who might notice what's happening. The love bombing phase doesn't last. It can't. No one can sustain that level of attention indefinitely. And that's part of the design too. The withdrawal is calculated. Once you're hooked, the love bomber pulls back. The constant texts become occasional, the compliments become criticisms, the warmth becomes coldness, and you panic. What did I do wrong? How do I get the good version back? You work harder, you try to please, you twist yourself into shapes trying to recapture what you had at the beginning. This is exactly what they want. You're no longer evaluating whether this relationship is good for you, you're just trying to get back to the start, chasing a feeling that was manufactured, that was never real. Eventually, the mask slips, the criticism becomes constant, the coldness becomes the norm, but by then, you're hooked. You've tasted what it felt like to be adored, and you'll do anything to get it back. Now, there's a case that shows this mechanism with devastating clarity. A man who was so skilled at love bombing that he convinced a successful businesswoman to marry him within months, despite warnings, despite evidence. Despite everything, his name was John Meehan. You might know him as Dirty John. Deborah Newell was 59 years old when she met John Meehan on an online dating site in 2014. She was a successful interior designer. She had been married 4 times before. She should have known better. That's what everyone would say later. But John was different, or so it seemed. He was handsome, charming, an anesthesiologist, he said. He had just returned from a year of humanitarian work in Iraq, a doctor who helped people, a hero. From the first date, he was intense, texting constantly, calling multiple times a day, telling her she was beautiful, special, different from anyone he'd ever met. He wanted to see her every day. He wanted to know everything about her. He wanted to build a life together, immediately. Within 2 months, they were married. Her daughters were horrified. They ran background checks. They found criminal records. They found lies upon lies. John wasn't a doctor. He had never been to Iraq. He was a con man with a history of drug abuse, fraud, and restraining orders. They showed Deborah the evidence. And here's where love bombing reveals its power. She didn't believe them. The man who texted her 50 times a day couldn't be a con man. The man who told her she was his soulmate couldn't be lying. The feeling was too real, too intense, too special. Her daughters must be wrong. Love bombing had done its work. It had created a bond so intense that evidence couldn't break it. Deborah's own perception had been captured. She was no longer evaluating John objectively. She was defending the person who made her feel extraordinary. The marriage eventually collapsed. The lies became undeniable. John's behavior escalated. He stalked Deborah. He threatened her family. It ended with violence. John attacked one of Deborah's daughters with a knife and was killed in self-defense. But for months, maybe years, Deborah had stayed. Not because she was stupid, not because she was weak, because love bombing had worked exactly as designed. It had made her need him. And need doesn't respond to logic. Love bombing is the hook, the overwhelming wave of attention that pulls you in. But it's not what keeps you trapped. For that, there's another mechanism, something even more powerful, the unpredictable cycle that turns need into addiction. In the 1950s, psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered something that would explain addiction better than anything before. He was working with pigeons, simple experiments, press a lever, get food. But Skinner varied the reward schedules. Some pigeons got food every time they pressed the lever, others got food randomly. Sometimes after one press, sometimes after 10, sometimes after 100. What he found was counterintuitive. The pigeons who were rewarded every time, they pressed the lever when they were hungry, normal behavior. But the pigeons on random reinforcement, they became obsessed. They pressed the lever compulsively, they couldn't stop. Unpredictability created addiction. Skinner had discovered intermittent reinforcement, the principle that random rewards are far more powerful than consistent ones. This is why slot machines work. You don't win every time, you don't even win most times. But occasionally, unpredictably, you hit, and that occasional hit keeps you pulling the lever forever. Now apply this to relationships. What happens when someone is sometimes loving and sometimes cruel, sometimes attentive and sometimes absent, sometimes the person you fell in love with and sometimes a stranger? You become the pigeon, pressing the lever, waiting for the reward, unable to stop. Intermittent reinforcement is more powerful than consistent abuse. If someone is terrible all the time, you leave. It's clear, it's simple. This is a bad situation. But when they're sometimes wonderful, when you remember how it felt at the beginning, when there are good days mixed with bad, you stay, waiting for the good to come back. The waiting becomes the trap. The unpredictability keeps you hooked. You never know which version you're going to get, so you're always hoping, always trying. Maybe if I'm better, maybe if I don't upset them, maybe today will be different. This is why victims of abuse so often describe addiction. They know they should leave, they want to leave. But they can't. The intermittent reinforcement has rewired their brain. They're chasing the next hit. Now, there's a case that shows this mechanism at its most extreme. 3 women held captive for 10 years, who could have been broken by constant cruelty, but were controlled by something more effective, the unpredictable cycle of punishment and relief. Their captor was Ariel Castro. In August 2003, Michelle Knight accepted a ride from a man she knew casually. She was 21. She disappeared. The following year, Amanda Berry, 16, vanished. A year after that, Gina DeJesus, 14. All 3 were taken to the same place, a house on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, where Ariel Castro kept them for over a decade. The conditions were horrific: chains, starvation, repeated assault. But Castro didn't rely on constant terror. He alternated. There were periods of extreme violence, beatings, deprivation, locked in dark rooms for days. But there were also periods of relative calm. He would bring them food, watch television with them. Sometimes he would be almost gentle. The survivors described this cycle in detail after their rescue. They never knew which Castro they would get. The monster or the almost human. The unpredictability was itself a form of control. When he was violent, they focused on survival. When he was calm, they felt something close to gratitude. The relief after terror feels like kindness, even when it comes from the person who caused the terror. This is intermittent reinforcement at work, in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The women weren't just physically captive, they were psychologically trapped by the same mechanism that hooks a gambler to a slot machine. Random reward, unpredictable relief. The brain doesn't distinguish between a pellet of food and a moment of kindness. The three women were rescued in 2013 when Amanda Berry escaped and called for help. Castro was arrested, he confessed. He was sentenced to life plus 1,000 years. He hanged himself in his cell a month later. What remains is the testimony of the survivors, how they stayed sane, how they survived, and how the unpredictable cycle of cruelty and relief created a bond they couldn't break on their own. They were released only when the cage was physically opened. The psychological trap would not have released them. Intermittent reinforcement is the trap, the pattern that creates addiction. But there's one more mechanism, the most insidious of all, the one that doesn't just trap you, it makes you unable to see the trap. The term comes from a 1944 film called Gaslight. In the movie, a husband tries to convince his wife that she's going insane. He dims the gas lights in their home, then denies that anything has changed. He hides objects and tells her she lost them. He makes sounds in the attic and tells her she's imagining things. Slowly, she begins to doubt her own perception. Gaslighting is the manipulation of reality itself, not just lying about facts, making the victim question their ability to perceive facts. When someone gaslights you, they don't just say, "That didn't happen." They say it with such conviction that you wonder if maybe you're wrong, maybe you are remembering incorrectly, maybe you are too sensitive, maybe you are crazy. The power of gaslighting is that it attacks the foundation, not what you know, but your ability to know anything. Once that foundation cracks, you become dependent. If you can't trust your own perception, whose perception do you trust? Theirs. The manipulator becomes your only source of reality. Gaslighting is often subtle. A raised eyebrow when you describe something that happened. A patient sigh like they're dealing with a difficult child. "That's not what I said. You're overreacting. I think you need help." Over time, the victim internalizes this. They stop trusting themselves. They check with the manipulator before forming opinions. They apologize for their own perceptions. They live in a fog, unable to see clearly, unable to trust what they see. Now, there's a case that shows gaslighting at its most methodical. A man who didn't just lie to his partner, he chemically altered her reality, made her sick, then comforted her, made her crazy, then played the caring partner. His name was Ian Stewart. Helen Bailey was a successful author. She wrote children's books and a popular blog about grief after her husband drowned in 2011. She was intelligent, accomplished, surrounded by friends, the last person you'd expect to be manipulated. She met Ian Stewart through a bereavement support group. He had lost his wife too, he said. They bonded over shared grief. They fell in love. By 2014, they were living together in Helen's home. What Helen didn't know was that Ian had begun drugging her. Zopiclone, a powerful sedative. He put it in her food. Helen started feeling strange, tired all the time, confused, forgetting things. She went to doctors, she had tests. No one could explain what was wrong. Ian was supportive. He accompanied her to appointments. He expressed concern. He suggested maybe she was working too hard, maybe she needed rest. Helen documented her symptoms in her blog and emails. She wrote about her strange fatigue, her memory problems, her growing sense that something was deeply wrong. She didn't know the problem was living in her house. This is gaslighting at its purest. Ian wasn't just lying about external facts. He was manipulating Helen's experience of reality itself. She felt confused because he was drugging her. She felt crazy because he was making her crazy. And then he comforted her, the source of the poison and the apparent cure. Helen's friends noticed changes. She seemed foggy, not herself. But Helen had an explanation. She was unwell. Ian was taking care of her. In April 2016, Helen Bailey disappeared. Ian reported her missing. He played the devastated partner. 3 months later, police found Helen's body in the septic tank beneath the garage of her own home. Ian had murdered her. He had been slowly poisoning her for months, building a case that she was mentally unstable, preparing for her disappearance. The evidence was overwhelming. The drugs in her system, the financial transfers to Ian, the search history on his computer. He was convicted in 2017. What emerged in the trial was the systematic nature of the gaslighting. Ian had spent months making Helen doubt herself, making her dependent on his version of reality, so that when she felt something was wrong, she blamed herself, not him. The jury heard text messages, Ian responding to Helen's concerns about her memory with reassurance. "You're just tired, darling. You've been working too hard. Don't worry, I'm here to take care of you." Every message a lie, every comfort a manipulation. Ian's motive was money. Helen was worth millions. He had debts. He wanted her estate. But the method was gaslighting, month after month of making her doubt herself, until she was too confused to see what was happening, until she trusted him completely, until it was too late. The fog is the final mechanism. It doesn't just trap you in a situation, it makes you unable to see the situation clearly. You become lost in someone else's version of reality, and you can't find your way out alone. 3 mechanisms, 1 system. Love bombing hooks you, intermittent reinforcement traps you, gaslighting blinds you. Together they form a prison without walls, a trap that the victim often can't see, that friends and family struggle to understand. Why didn't they just leave? Now you know, these mechanisms work below conscious choice. They exploit needs, they create addiction, they destroy perception. The people who fall for manipulation aren't weak, they're human. These techniques work because they exploit universal wiring, the need to be seen, the hope for reward, the trust in shared reality. Anyone can be caught. Given the right manipulator, given the right circumstances, given enough time, the only defense is recognition. Seeing the pattern before you're inside it. Understanding the mechanisms before they capture you, which is why we're here. In the dark. Learning how it works. Thank you for staying with me tonight. Sleep well,